Good morning, everyone. I am Lisa Lord, and thank you for joining us for the first post-cabinet media briefing for 2024. A range of matters will be dealt with this morning, and we have the Minister of Home Affairs and Information, the Honorable Wilfred Abrams, the Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, and the Minister in the Prime Minister's Office with responsibility for culture, Senator Dr. the Honorable Shantal Munro-Knight. And I know that Minister Abrams, we wanted to start it with some introductory remarks.
Thanks for coming. It's good to see you all back after a bit of a break. From the government perspective, this is an exciting time for us. There's a lot. This is our year of delivery, right? There's a lot coming down the pipeline this year. Cabinet has been active since we started back a couple of weeks ago. We took a break of a week over the Christmas, and the agenda has been pretty packed. Just by way of explaining, so there's a lot that goes on in Cabinet that won't necessarily make a media briefing. There are reports that we consider. There is the normal humdrum of government, because effectively Cabinet is the board of directors of government. Right? It's not everything that we do that is press-worthy. A lot of it is the normal day-to-day activities, the approval of budgets, the approval of contracts that allow government to function but won't necessarily interest, I guess, the majority of the Barbadian public. Having said that, though, it's an exciting time. There are a number of matters that are going to be dealt with and announced to the public in very, very short order. Today, you'll get a snippet of some of them. There are others that would have been dealt with that could probably be done at this conference, but one of the ministers is not well, and we like to allow people to speak on their own matters. It's not fair to somebody who has piloted something or shepherded something, has achieved it, and then somebody else deals with it. So you are going to get a lot in very, very short order. And we start today with a couple of the things that would have occupied Cabinet over the last 2 weeks, and these are some things that are major game changers for Barbados and for Barbadians and for the way that we do business. So having said that, I'm just going to turn it straight over to Minister Munro-Knight to start us off.
Good morning to all of you, and I hope I can still wish you all the best for 2024. Minister Abrams said this is the year of delivery for the government, and so I'm very happy to be here at this press conference to announce the establishment of something that the Prime Minister would have announced near the end of last year, 2023, when she would have said to us that the government would be launching a call centre to allow Barbadian citizens to speak to the government about their concerns and challenges with the delivery of government services, and to be able to make recommendations about how they feel those services could be improved. So officially, we will be launching the Citizen Services Contact Centre on Tuesday, January 23rd. That Citizen Services Contact Centre will be made up of 3 areas. One, the call centre the Prime Minister would have announced, and the number for that call centre is 573-7373. 573-7373. That call centre will run from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the night. 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. But citizens will also have the opportunity to email their concerns and as well as WhatsApp their concerns. So we've broadened that initial response of having a call center now to include these other elements. But I want to step back a minute and talk about the why of this. This is government response to say to citizens, we are hearing you, we are feeling you, we are seeing you. We hear the concerns that citizens speak to on the calling programs and in other fora about their dissatisfaction with the level of delivery of government services. That's the reality. And this is something the government has been working on, not just in a minute, but over 2023, the government, and under the leadership of our Prime Minister, has been bringing together ministers of government, permanent secretaries, and other officers almost monthly to discuss how we improve and how as a government we rise to the challenge of making sure that we have a government that is fit for purpose for delivery for our citizens. We are a public service. And that is the message that we have been working on, and to be able to understand that. You would have seen that this year in our National Independent Service, we would have rewarded the Immigration Department. And we did so because that is one plank of our process in terms of improvement, our process in terms of what Prime Minister always speaks to as deconstruction and reconstruction of the public service. And we did so to create an exemplar for the rest of the public service about this is what delivery for people should be looking like. And so that this Contact Service Centre is again one initiative in that ongoing work of transformation of the public service, of making sure that we deliver for the public. So what is it that the public will be able to contact this centre about? One, we are not replacing other contact centres that are already in operation. So of course, you know, you have the Barbados Water Authority, you have BRA already up, Transport Board. We're not intending to replace that. So that citizens can, if they want to, use us as a first point of contact. Again, because our hours are 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., we run a little bit early, a little bit later than some of the others. So you can use us as your first point of contact. And what we will do is make sure then that we pass on and respond to immediately, because this is important, right? So we're not setting up a contact center in which, again, you then have to wait, etc. There's some things, of course, that are going to be complex that we will not be able to deal with. But as much as possible, we have been training our agents, taking information from all of those ministries and departments, centralizing them, making sure that those agents understand them to be able to respond. But where we cannot respond on the spot, we have given ministries and departments a specific amount of time in order to be able to respond to those queries so that we can respond to you, our citizens, as quickly as possible. But secondly as well, if you were calling any of those agencies, if you're calling government departments and not getting through, if nobody's responding to you, nobody's picking up the phone, you call us. You call us. This is the center, 573-7373. This is the place that you call. But we don't only want you to call with complaints, we also want you to call with recommendations. We've been holding Paris Speaks right throughout again 2023. And what we've recognized is that citizens themselves have solutions, have suggestions, and clear pathways to perhaps how government can address some of those issues. So we want to be able to provide a space where citizens as well can tell us some of those solutions. We can document them and make sure that, again, that they are channeled to the ministries and departments that have to receive them. Yeah, so those are three ways in which this contact center will work. One, like I said before, that first point of contact if you choose. Secondly, if you're not getting through to the ministries and departments that already have contact centers, and you call us. And again, there are some ministries and departments that don't have contact centers. That's because they're so small. They don't have call centers on their own. And very often we know that citizens become frustrated because nobody is answering. And that happens because, say, for instance, the Division of Culture, we don't have a reception. You know, we're a small department, a small division. So you would have to wait for a secretary to answer. But now we have the Citizen Services Contact Center where you're going to be guaranteed, because we're working to 100% call answer. So that is 100% you will be able to speak to a Barbadian agent that will answer the phone and respond to you. But also as well, we're also saying, even if you have to wait more than a minute for a call, you can also have the option of saying that you want to have a call back. Yeah? So somebody will call you back if you are waiting too long. So that's how serious we are in relation to making sure that this works. Yeah. So from Tuesday, January 23rd, citizen can call, and I'm going to give that number again, 573-7373. Over this weekend, you will see ads coming out, giving you details on the email and WhatsApp number, again, so that you can have that information, and so that, again, people who do not want to call can also then be able to use these other modes to be able to contact government. Finally, I just want to say, again, that, you know, government is committed. We are committed to making sure that we have transformation in the public sector. And many people would say it's not going as fast as we would like it. The public sector is huge, and therefore things take time. But I'm hoping that the country will see again in all of these efforts our genuine attempt to be responsive as much as possible, to afford citizens an opportunity for us to hear you and genuinely hear you, so that we have engaged an international firm to be able to provide the service, and that is also backstopped by an internal team operating under the CFR department. And that CFR department is under the Prime Minister's office. And that is responsible for an overall frame, again, of making sure that the public service develops a framework that we can monitor and measure performance. Again, another plank of that public service transformation. So we're bringing all of those things together. And this is just the first stage. The final stage of that, phase 2, will be that we will centralize all of the existing call centers to make sure that we can better monitor what is happening in terms of citizen complaints and the quality and delivery of government services. Thank you very much.
As Minister Abrams had indicated, Minister Munro-Knight has to leave for a meeting, so we will take some questions now from members of the media.
Let's start with the call center. You said that it would be calls will be answered by a baby.
Yes.
Roughly how many people are you looking to see employed by the center?
The center is going to employ, just at the beginning, perhaps like about 50 to 60 persons will be employed. But I want to say here that is an external service provider. So as government, we don't have any say in terms of, the employment or anything like that. So we've given that service provider, the job to deliver that. Right, to deliver that service for us. But what we are guaranteeing is that you're not going to hear another accent. You're going to hear a Barbadian accent answering that phone when you call.
What is the name of the service provider?
Pardon?
What is the name of the service?
Trident.
As a space being earmarked, where they should be earmarked, where they're operating.
Well, again, that's up to Trident. Again, that's not, like I said, this is an external service provider who's providing a service. What we've contracted them to do is to provide that service. Where they operate and all of that is entirely up to them. Trident provide these services internationally to many companies all around the world. And we procured Trident, again, using the recently proclaimed Procurement Act, where we solicited, persons to bid for the service. Trident was selected, and like I said before then, all of those things, logistics about where the people would be and how they would be employed are up to that service provider and not government. Within government, our team within government, like I said, operates from within the Prime Minister's office, because there's a department that has been set up that oversees what we call our grievance redress mechanism process, under which the call center will operate, and that has 2 persons. So myself as Minister in the Prime Minister's office, that is a responsibility that I manage. We have a permanent secretary, and we have a dedicated officer that will be working specifically on the call center from the government side. So that is what I can say to you definitively.
In terms of the information that will be handled, there are some things that you're having the average Joe having access to what persons might consider sensitive information. I'm assuming the requisite training has been put in place, and in terms of any cybersecurity concerns that might be there, those have been addressed, because there's that fear of what might have happened at the hospital 2 years ago.
Yes. So one, yes, just in terms of cybersecurity. So that would have been part of our call, making sure that whoever won the bid will be able to have those mechanisms to make sure the privacy, the confidentiality of the information, as well as the security as well of the information. But at the same time, citizens call in on the calling program every day. They call into Barbados Water Authority every day and ask questions. What this does is to make sure that they're able to get a response. And I don't know that that information is any confidential or so confidential. We will be working with the ministries. There may be some things, like I said, that are very complex in terms of a response. And therefore, we will put that person in touch directly with the ministry and then allow for them to liaise directly, right, in those cases. So we will have a set of things that we can respond to immediately, a set of things that we may need to be able to have to refer. So for instance, if somebody calls in and asks about a water main, so you're not talking to somebody from the Barbados Water Authority directly, yeah? So we will be able to say, listen, there is a concern that we have from the citizens about a water main. We'll take the information what would happen is that the Barbados Water Authority will alert us to those challenges up front. So in many cases, hopefully, we will have that information up front that can say, listen, we know what is happening, we're deploying tankers, etc. But if not, somebody is there that will call the Barbados Water Authority and say, listen, this is a concern that we have. What is it that we need to be able to respond, or how is it that we need to be able to respond to this citizen as well?
Do you know how much the consultancy or the engagement is costing government with Trident?
So the engagement with Trident is just over $10,000 a month to provide the call center services.
Any idea of how long it will go on for? Will that be based on demand for?
Well, what we're doing, because this is something that we are working through. When I say we're working through, so what we're doing is an initial 6 months. Yeah, and so we have an initial 6 months contract. And what that would allow us to do is, again, just to see if it works, to see if it makes sense, to see how citizens are engaging with it, if we need to course correct, make changes, and then we will re-engage. Because we don't want to set something that's so fixed, that if we need to make changes, if it isn't working, that we can't do that. So it's an initial 6 months, and then we will roll out from there. Again, once we are certain that this system is working for everyone. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, everybody.
This is a brand new concept. We are trying to do something that has not been done before on a scale that has not even been contemplated before. One central point for answering and addressing citizen concerns and providing information. It will have its teething issues. As the systems align, as we understand how they interact and work, as we develop certain databases, we are going to have some teething issues. So I'm asking people just to bear in mind that it will not be 100% from the get-go, no matter how well you set it up. It is going to have to run and course correct and course correct and course correct till we get it to where we want it to be. But the intention is there to make it best in class. So I just want to make that point clear.
Thank you, Minister Abrams. We'll now hear from Minister Humphrey.
Good morning to everyone, and Happy New Year to those I have not seen, which I think is, apart from Wilfred, everyone in the room, and maybe you. So very Happy New Year to all of you. And it is a pleasure to be here to brief you on some of the things that would be done in my ministry that would have been approved at the cabinet meetings over the last few weeks since the year started. There are two things I want to tell you about this morning. The first is that Barbados will be proceeding on a poverty assessment to have a clear understanding as to the level of poverty in Barbados, to calculate the poverty line and to calculate the number of households that are in poverty. You would appreciate that this poverty study is necessary in order for us to make proper decisions, as is the case for any decision making. You need to have the relevant data to be able to do so. The reality is as well that COVID would have made any poverty statistics that we had prior to COVID pretty much irrelevant. And therefore, in the best of circumstances, you should probably have updated poverty statuses, poverty data every 2 years. The last poverty study that was done in Barbados was done in 2016. And at that time, it showed that Barbados had 17.2% households in poverty. The study done before that was in 2010, and it said there were 15% of Barbadian households in poverty. And prior to that, it was 1997, and it showed 8.7% of Barbadian households were in poverty. And understand that the poverty line is not a static line. It is calculated based on what the evidence would suggest over the data collection period. This poverty program that we're working on is called the Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment, or the ECPA, the Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment. We're doing this poverty study with the Caribbean Development Bank and with some support from the IDB. This poverty assessment has 4 components, and the last poverty study we did in Barbados with the Caribbean Development Bank was called the CALC, the Country Assessment of Living Conditions. This is the Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment, so it has a few additions. But this poverty study has 4 components. The first is the institutional assessment, where we have to determine the agencies responsible for delivering programs that would cause persons to experience less poverty. So my ministry, Ministry of Health, Education, NGOs, and so on. That's the IA, the institutional assessment. The other is the macro-social assessment, where you look at the wider socio-economic context and to try to get an understanding as to the realities in the country at the time. And that will give you kind of an understanding of the context of the day. The third component is the participatory poverty assessment, where you go into communities and you speak to people and you speak to the persons in the NGO and you try to get people's real understanding of poverty, so that you get the understanding of poverty from the persons who are actually experiencing poverty at the time, so that helps you make better decisions. And then the final component is the survey of living conditions and / the household budget survey. And this, for the most part, is what most people know of a poverty study. This is where you get your poverty line. This is where you get your vulnerability line. This is where you're able to establish the amount of money that is necessary to be able to have a decent life above poverty in a country. And this is what most people are aware of, you know. But all these other components are equally important. We are working with the Caribbean Development Bank, so the cost to the government of this particular study is $1.3 million. It is not the total cost of the study, it is the government's component. We are paying only for the last component that I spoke of, which is the survey of living conditions / household budget survey. That is the data collection component. That is $1.3 million. We are also being supported by the IDB. They're putting, for now, but we understand that it will increase. They've paid for the design of the survey instrument, and that is 270,000 Barbados dollars, 135,000 US dollars. So essentially, the cost is going to be significantly more than this, but the Caribbean Development Bank is carrying most of that cost. They will be bringing on consultants to help the government to be able to execute this, because it is called an Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment, because the idea is to ensure that when this is done, that we would not need any outside agencies to come in and do this work. It builds the capacity of the agencies that are involved in the poverty assessment. So Barbadians can be assured that we will have a new poverty line. We'll be able to give the country an update on the level of poverty by the end of the year. The data collection component of it takes 6 months. So the next few steps is that for the next 2 months until the end of the financial year, we will be designing the instrument, hiring the consultants with the Caribbean Development Bank, and so on. And then from April 1st, the intention is to start the data collection. And that process lasts 6 months, because you want to get as much information over that period of time. The IDB study normally lasts a year. The data collection component, the CDB component, is 6 months. And that allows us to be able in a position to make serious determinations about how do we treat the poverty. Who is experiencing poverty? Where is that poverty? Do we need to make new adjustments to the government's social programming? Because you really cannot make decisions if you do not have the data. So by the end of the year, we'll have this new a more accurate reflection as to the level of poverty in Barbados. And therefore, we will then be able to make decisions going forward about how we would seek to address the levels of poverty in Barbados. I want to thank the Caribbean Development Bank, of course, and I want to thank the IDB for coming on board and being such good partners to the government. In addition, the CDB has also given the government access to a gender specialist to be able to do some of this work, and a social policy advisor. So in addition to supporting the wider data collection, we have access to these two specialists to be able to improve how we go about doing a lot of this policy and development work. And we anticipate that we will all be better off for not only the data collection component, but in terms of the capacity of the organizations that we work with. The other component that I would wish to talk to you about that we addressed at Cabinet, and we approved this yesterday, was what we now call the Resiliency and Reintegration Unit. There will be a new unit located in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. It is called the Resilience and Reintegration Unit. This unit is going to be vital, and I mean vital, to our delivery of services. And you may ask me, what does that mean? Although the name tends to give it away. The current reality is, as you would appreciate, that over the last few years, Barbados is in a climate crisis. We've been facing disasters. The number of persons being evicted from their households, I mean, I'm sure you've known, if it hasn't increased, it's certainly become more publicized. But I believe it has increased in terms of the family failings and so on. And then the number of people we see on the street that are homeless. This unit is meant to address those things. There's been a response from the Ministry of People Empowerment to address these issues in relation to the fact that if a person now suffers, let's say there's slippage in one of the parishes that experience slippage, they call the ministry and they're looking for housing. They're looking for support. This normally ends up at the welfare department and takes the welfare department off their track, which is to deliver regular social services. If in the event of ELSA, the ministry was called upon to house most of the persons who were displaced as a result of ELSA, but there was no unit to be able to address that. And of course, the ministry is also now responding to housing, and again, there's no unit to address that. So this one unit brings together those three areas primarily, but it allows us to fill a gap in the government's delivery of social services, and from April 1, this unit will be in place. This unit is now in the estimates of expenditure and will be functioning from April 1. I should tell you that currently there are two departments, so these are not necessarily new staff. There's the PARP, which is already the Poverty Alleviation Relief Program that is currently in the ministry. We're using that staff because they've been responding, but in an ad hoc fashion. And the Poverty Coordinator has also been working on it. So we're bringing together these two departments. The most we may need are a couple of field investigators to go and do some of this work. The other important component of this is that this is going to be a 24-hour response system. There are many times where these things happen in the middle of the night, and persons call the welfare department, persons call the ministry, and of course the officers work 9 to 5, like most persons, 9 to 5. But these persons will be available 24 hours to allow persons to know that in the event that they have a disaster, that this is a 24-hour government. And we will be in a position to respond to those issues as they arise. I would also want to tell you that in the last month, the government was able to do a count of the homeless persons in Barbados. This is a point-in-time count. It is meant only to be just that, a point-in-time count. And what a point-in-time count is that you go out and you take a team of people, and at one time across the country, you try to get the numbers that is reflective of the reality of the situation. I would not want the media to call it and say these are the number of homeless people in total, because the only way you would know that is if you do this count, I would say at least 2 or 3 times, so that you can get a better idea. We did it around Christmas in December, and of course we would need to do it another time to be able to ensure that we catch the seasons, we go out at different times to make sure you catch different people, and so on and so forth. There may be persons have already called and said there were other areas that we probably should have visited, and so on. So during the course of that point in time count, I should also tell you we did this count with UE, the University of the West Indies. It wasn't done by the ministry alone. It was done with the University of the West Indies. And we employed 50 students to go out into the field. We worked with the Alliance to End Homelessness. We worked with Seroptimus, and we worked with a number of different agencies who are involved in this kind of work to be able to get the numbers that are currently what we found on the street. So what we found during that count, and the count was executed on December 12, 2023, there were 225 homeless persons with 139 persons living on the streets and 86 of those homeless persons being accommodated in shelters. 225 persons, 139 persons living on the street, and 86 of those persons being accommodated in shelters. As I said before, this is the count on the night of December 12th. And I've asked the university and I've also asked the ministry to at least do this for another 3 times so that we have a better understanding of the reality of the amount of persons who are homeless. But the Resilience and Reintegration Unit will now be tasked with working with these homeless persons to see how best we can get them into employment, get them the help that they need, and so on and so forth. And again, as I said, to respond to fires and so on, and to make sure that the government is best positioned to respond. You would also appreciate that we've set up the amalgamated services, or we are setting up the Welfare Department, Child Care Board, National Disabilities Unit, National Assistance Board. We've recently included the One Family program into this unit, which would focus on delivering social services. But this unit that we're setting up will be dealing with emergencies and disasters from a social perspective, working, of course, with DEM, working with the Ministry of Housing, working with the Alliance to End Homelessness, and so on and so forth. So that is basically the situation for now. I hope that once we've been able to set up the resilience unit, that it makes a big difference. I trust that it will, a significant game changer in how we are able to deliver and respond to persons who are in crisis. In fact, now there will be a direct place for persons to go. We would have seen over the last year, I think, while we still have a number of persons applying for rents, we've seen that too has been reduced. For example, in 2021, I think this was primarily because of COVID, the Welfare Department was had new applications. This is not who we were paying for. There were new applications for rent at the Welfare Department for 1,250 persons. In 2022, it was 1,143 persons, and in 2023, 1,019 persons. So these numbers are coming down. I think as the country opens up, more people get work, as the country is getting back to a state of normalcy. But again, 1,000 persons is still too high, which happened, I think, as a consequence of COVID. And so that is the reality as to where we are now. But I would urge, as I close, Minister, I would urge, because a lot of what we're saying now are the more recent evictions of mothers with children, whether it is from family members or from landlords, to steady your hand, if you can, and to work with the government in those circumstances to see how best we can help persons before they actually end up on the street, to ensure that we are not in a situation where these things that are avoidable become unavoidable, really, and that we have to respond instead of dealing it in a way that is preventative. Thank you very much. The other thing is that in the Ministry of People Empowerment all across the government, I think as a consequence of between 2010 and 2018 particularly, truthfully, when I was previously in the ministry, the Welfare Department used to pay rents for persons who were displaced. And for the most part, persons anticipated that they had rented with the Welfare Department, even if it took a few days, maybe a month, they would get their monies. In a period of between 2010, I think, post-2010, 2012, where persons' rents were not paid at the pace and the rate that they would have liked, that has caused a lot of persons to have a tremendous distrust now of the government in terms of their payment capacity. We would have run a couple ads inviting persons to come in and to rent to the Welfare Department or to rent to the government, to allow us to house some of these persons who would have been displaced as a result of the climate crisis, who would have been displaced as a result of a family situation, or just because of the economic realities of the day. And the initial response to some of those ads were not as appealing or as exciting as I would have liked. And we've made some adjustments to what we are prepared to offer the public. First of all, there was a cap at welfare of $800. That cap has been removed. In the ministry, we'd already been offering $1,500, $2,000, but these rents are negotiable based on when we send the officers what they find. So if the conditions merit a higher rent, then we would negotiate the rent. We're saying as well that the rent must include utilities to the government, so that when the government is paying the rent, we will pay the rent as well as the utilities must be part of that rent. And the government is now prepared to pay the person 3 months' rent up front. It could be first, last, and a deposit, or 3 months, however you choose to have it, but 3 months to give you the assurance that you will have the comfort of knowing, even if there are some delays, you already have 3 months' rent payments in your hand. You will see an ad coming out very soon from the Ministry of Housing to invite Barbadians who have housing, apartments, facilities that they could rent to the government to do so, with the guarantee that after the negotiations and after it is agreed upon, and after the person has visited and determined that the conditions are worthy, that they would get the 3 months rent up front, but that the rent must include the utilities, and that we would continue to work with the landlord and the persons who are in the houses to make sure that the properties are not destroyed, and that the persons who are renting the units abide by the rules of the landlord as well. So these are all the things that we're trying to make accommodation to ensure that we could offer better social assistance to the persons who are most in need, and that facility really is available now. We'll be running the ad from next week, but that facility is available now. So if persons hear this on the radio or if they see it in the news, we are willing to receive persons now, and if they qualify, to offer 3 months rent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Humphrey. We now turn to Minister Abrams again.
This year, as an overview, it is not normal for us in press conferences to discuss legislation that's about to come before the House or legislation that's going to be debated. But just to give you some idea of the position of the government for 2024, the government is undertaking a comprehensive review of our legislation. There exists right now a law reform commission. The commission, as it stands now, I don't want to say ad hoc, but it doesn't have the force of a statutory corporation. It's not a statutory body. And we are going to be introducing into Parliament the Law Revision and Reform Amendment Bill 2024. And the proposal is to make the current Law Reform Commission into a statutory body. This would give greater independence to the Law Reform Commission in its operations. It would allow it to hire its own staff. It would allow it to enter into contracts for the provision of specialized services. It also is going to make provision for the appointment of a director of the Law Reform Commission. Now, what does this mean and why is this necessary? Law reform and legislative drafting is as varied as you can conceptualize. Every law that exists currently in Barbados, whether it governs homelessness, whether it governs finance, whether it governs, contracts between states, whether it governs the Army, the Barbados Defense Force, those are all subject to some legislation. What tends to happen is we pass legislation, we have numbers of a lot of obsolete legislation on the books. You don't realize it's there until something happens and you realize that this legislation is then outdated. The Law Reform Commission, their task is to continually review the laws and to make recommendations, in some instances secure the drafting and updating of all of our legislation. Even down to, you may pass a piece of legislation now, today, and when you put it into effect, you then realize in the operation of the legislation that certain things crop up that were not contemplated. So the Law Reform Commission is able to track those, make the recommendations so that our legislation is at all time relevant and best in class. Now, our CPC, Chief Parliamentary Counsel in the Solicitor General's office, their staff is overwhelmed. It's one set of people who are doing all of the drafting for everything pretty much in Barbados. If you want to draft an amendment to the Vagrancy Act or the Theft Act, is the exact same group of people who are tasked with doing that as are tasked with trying to do amendments to treaties or law of the sea provisions or something. And this is not practical. We need to be able to avail ourselves of specialized services to assist in the drafting of legislation by making by making these amendments to the law revision and law reform legislation, it allows the body more autonomy to look at the legislation and also to contract for services. In the bulk of the cutting-edge legislation, we cannot do it in-house. If something is not native to us, then we have to import the skills. And we have to jump through some hoops to do it. So this is intended, as I said, to make the body a little bit more autonomous and to facilitate government's legislative agenda and reform agenda over the next 12 months and into the future. There's a lot coming down. As I said, I can't talk to you about a lot of it, but I can give snippets. For example, I met with the AG this week, and we looked at the Health Services Act, the nuisance legislation, things like that govern derelict lots. Because with what is going on now with the prevalence of dengue, and I mean everybody is crying out for the debushing and people to have responsibility for their own lots, right? The existing legislative structure does not allow government to properly enforce that, or to allow government to recover monies that it spends in dealing with it. The intention is to have a ticketed system, so we're not trying to criminalize property owners, but you still must be responsible. So if you are served a notice on a ticket, and you don't rectify it, then that's going to become a debt that is collectible by the government in the same way it collects any other debts. So you're not necessarily attaching it to land tax, which was the concern of some people, right? But it's going to become a debt collectible in the way that government collects debts. Now, so I can tell you that one is imminent, right? So it is that and a lot of other things. But as I said, it's the same set of people right now who are responsible for drafting everything. This gives a little bit more autonomy as to what they can contract out, and we hope that with this, we will get faster reviews of legislation, a more current legislative context, and the ability to get the services in that allow for the faster drafting of new legislation or correction of legislation that's in need of drafting. In keeping with government's well-publicized 2030 policy of the elimination of fossil fuels, and the decision of government to move to electric as much as possible, hybrid where the electric option is not solely available. The government had deferred in replacing the vehicles for a number of senior officials. M50, the Prime Minister's car, was due for replacement about 2 years ago, but the decision was taken to defer the replacement of her vehicle until a suitable vehicle that is electric can be found to replace it. Some of the judges as well or other senior officials are due for the replacement of their vehicles under their contracts for services. So that is going to start again this year. We've been able to source vehicles. I can tell you that in short order, probably as we speak now, there's a new M50 on the road. What I understand is that it is pretty much a replacement, a fair swap. You've upgraded the vehicle to electric, but it's pretty much the same version of the vehicle in an electric format as was there before. But the Prime Minister was adamant that she was not changing her car until she can get an electric vehicle, a suitable electric vehicle. So that is, we're towing the line with respect to that policy, and we're trying to phase out the use of the fossil fuel vehicles. It has not been easy. It has not been easy. The types of vehicles that we've had access to in our market have been, for many instances, restrictive. I've spoken to some of the car dealers who have indicated that people keep, for example, asking when you can bring electric trucks. There's more of an interest in electric SUVs. So Barbadians have the appetite to change to electric, but they want electric in what it is that they want, as opposed to necessarily what is being offered now. But our policy was to replace vehicles, the fleet of government vehicles, with electric vehicles, and that is starting this year, full-fledged, with respect to the Prime Minister and other senior officials and other ministerial vehicles. So our vehicles that we are getting in our ministry this year as well, I think the Post Office again is something, there's some other replacement vehicles that we delayed on. All of those are now being replaced with electric vehicles, right? So when you see M50, a new M50 on the road, there's nothing mysterious to it. It was well overdue for change, but the Prime Minister took the decision not to change it until she could get a suitable vehicle that was electric in keeping with the government's policy. just to answer I think the replacement is a minimum of 5 years. Sorry, a maximum of 5 years. It should be replaced at least once every 5 years. The premises vehicle is over 7 years old. So for 2 years, she's delayed until she could toe the line with respect to the policy of the government.
Thank you, Minister. Opening now for questions for both Ministers Abrams and Humphrey.
Do you know how many of the vehicles are likely to be changed this year?
I don't know how many are likely to be changed this year, but understand, a number of officials have held pace with government in executing our mandate. So your contract may say you are due to change a vehicle at the end of 5 years, but a number of the officials have actually said, look, let's hold with government until we can get the electric vehicles. So I want to thank them, because people can insist on the strict performance of their contract, and we can't say anything, but then we be buying you another fossil fuel vehicle when we know that we want to go electric. So I will say that for the large part, persons have held strain and been accommodating to the position of the government, but we are seeking to replace the vehicles, because at a certain point in time, the maintenance on those vehicles doesn't make any sense. As a vehicle gets to a certain age, it is actually cheaper to change it if it is in constant use than it is to keep maintaining it, especially some of the types of vehicles that are out there. Any other questions?
You gave I think you gave stats on
Which paper?
this was the poverty.
The ECPA.
Lord.
The poverty enhanced country poverty assessment.
The very first one, you gave a breakdown
Oh
of
shoot.
the last assessment being done in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
which was, I think you said 17.2, then you gave one for 2010, and then one for 1997.
Yeah.
It might be premature, but is it fair to say that that number has likely increased since the last time?
I am a researcher by profession, a social scientist by training. There is no way I would answer that question and say yes or no. I don't know. I could tell you, however, that given COVID and the experience of COVID, everything has changed. There was no doubt that during COVID, people weren't working, and the level of poverty would surely have increased during COVID. But I also know that in the last year, particularly the last year and a half, a lot of people have gone back to work, circumstances have changed. But if you've been through a shock, the way shocks work, if you've been through a shock, the time that it takes to recover from a shock, to get back even to normalcy, is perhaps sometimes twice as long as it would normally take. So I would rather wait on the findings of the survey to answer that question truthfully, but if I'm being very honest with you, I would not be surprised if it were a case where the realities of COVID manifested themselves in the findings.
Once you spoke about emergency services, you said that they were being...
In the findings. In the findings. Sorry.
You said that the amalgamated services, you're looking to bring together the various departments within the ministry. Are we any closer to having a definitive amalgamated?
Oh, absolutely. The final report should be in our hands on February 15th. I was hoping to launch the new family services by April 1st. We've already started negotiating with the staff in relation to what this new entity would look like, because we already have a structure. We have a basic structure for the family services department. The staff are already aware. We've had several meetings. In fact, we've met with all the staff. The ones we haven't met with were probably not available when we had the meetings. So they know. We've already started talking to the unions. So we will have the paper to cabinet, the final paper to cabinet, by the middle of February, and then the physical transitioning begins. So I was hoping April 1st. It depends on the conversations with the unions and so on, but surely within the next few months.
Would the resilience and
Reintegration?
the integration unit fall under that?
No. So this is the point, right? So as it stands now, the welfare department essentially does, in an ad hoc manner, some of this work. Welfare officers who are social workers spend their time going asking landlords for rents, Would you be willing to rent my client? And so on and so forth. If there's a disaster, go into the disaster. We want the welfare officers, who will now be family services officers, to focus primarily on delivering social work. So you are a social worker, do social work. And let this agency, though we have a couple of social workers in there because you always have to counsel people, but let this agency that is responsible for disasters and dealing with homelessness and evictions respond to those housing issues. So no, it is a separate department. It would be a more flexible arrangement for that staff because we need them to be 24 hours during the course of the day, and that department would also have different skills. And a large part of that work would be done in consultation and conjunction with the Ministry of Housing, National Housing Corporation, Minister Abrams' ministry for the EM, and so on. But no, it won't be in there. There are 4, and we just added one more, just for clarity. The National Assistance Board, National Disabilities Unit, Welfare Department, the Child Care Board. We launched last year the One Family program. We are incorporating One Family into that department as well. So it'll be 5 of those. The One Family unit is essentially what we would like to think is the model for what social services should be, where you get access to all the government social services, right? So you come in, you had a problem with your grandmother, and the person visits the household. Instead of dealing with the grandmother, which is the current kind of arrangement in welfare, NDU, elderly, you go and you visit the person you come to visit, and that's it. Under One Family, when you visit a house, you look at all of the people in the house, and you look at all of the social deprivations that may exist within that household, and you try to address all. And we are doing that for 1,000 families, and hopefully, eventually, it becomes really the model for the entire delivery of social services.
You started One Family, publicity here. There happened around Christmas, and we're past Christmas. My question is, what is the next step for that project in terms of where we're going with it, and what has the response by the clients been for what is happening?
We didn't start around Christmas, right? We started well before Christmas. I know you corrected yourself, but I want to help correct you. We started long before Christmas, and we during Christmas, I think we intensified because people obviously are much more of a giving mood during the Christmas season. And the response so far has been pretty good. There has been 100 and something persons that have come forward and asked to partner with the department to either mentor or to adopt a family so far. There have been the Chamber of Commerce has come forward and said that they want to support it. The Barbados Private Sector Association as well have also come forward. And we're working out how that support is going to be. Probably financial, but there are also individuals within those organizations. You will see more ads. Again, I think some should have been out this weekend, if not definitely next week. This is going to be an ongoing process. The truth is, the people who are in need of support in Barbados don't only need support at Christmas, and they will need this support for a long time. The thrust of the program is that we genuinely believe that the Barbadians who are not experiencing poverty, or even those who are still in a position to help somebody else with something. It is in the Barbadian DNA. We believe it to be who we are, and therefore the whole crux of this program is that if it is that is the reality of Barbados, that people will come forward. This program is going to be, you're going to be seeing ads for this program for the course of the year. And of course, if you don't want to come and join the One Family program, you're free to go and help your neighbor. Buy some footballs for the children so they could play if they want to play. Help them with uniforms. If you know somebody doesn't have food, help them with food. Especially the elderly persons. If you know somebody who is in the community that needs some help. This weekend, the cabinet ministers, well, the MPs, all of us, have determined that we're all doing a community-based project, all of us, one in some form or fashion. Some will publicize theirs, some won't publicize theirs. Over this long weekend, if you know somebody who's in your community who needs some help, then I'm encouraging the public to go and render that help to the person. Do it quietly if you want to, if it is something that the person wants publicized, because some people want these things publicized. If that's what they want, the person, the client, then so be it. The other thing is in relation to the One Family program is that, and the welfare delivery of social services really, is that we've been doing a lot of focus groups. So we've been working with the clients. You asked me about the clients. We've been meeting with the clients. We've been doing so many focus groups meetings to allow us to be in a position to say this is what the clients want. So this is not top-down design by the university and the ministry without the consultation of the public or the actual clientele. So we know that the model that we're creating is something that the public will want to see. And on February 15th or thereabout, when I have the final model after Cabinet has approved it, hopefully Minister Abrams will allow me to be back here to talk about what that amalgamated model looks like. And at that point in time, I could give you more details on that.
As this is a post-cabinet briefing, were there any discussions regarding the appointment of the BTMI CEO?
So BTMI is an independent body, it's a body corporate. It has its board of management, and they're responsible for the contracting of services or the hiring of officers with respect to their company. What I will tell you is that Cabinet was advised that the BTMI had pretty much selected someone for the position, and we were notified, but it is not my decision to tell anybody. Right? What I will tell you is that you can expect an announcement from BTMI in very, very short order. We don't have to approve it. We were notified as a courtesy because it is a substantial government entity, and we were advised as to the person, and I do believe that they are going to be announcing that in very, very, very short order because, as I said, we have been notified. But it's not for me to say that here, but I expect something from them shortly.
Will you guys also notified us to the position of the QEH if the CEO has been appointed and chosen yet?
I can tell you about the other one because that we were advised as to that yesterday. But as I said, it is not a decision of Cabinet. They select their own staff. But I know that it has been swirling a lot out there in the public, people asking about it. I saw it recently in Nation very, very recently about what is going on there. So I can pretty much tell people you're going to get your answer very soon, but it can't come from me. All right.
So if there are no further questions, let me just thank the Minister of Home Affairs and Information, the Honorable Wilfred Abrams, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, and earlier we heard from the Minister in the Prime Minister's Office with responsibility for culture, Senator Dr. the Honorable Shantal Munro-Knight. Colleagues, thank you so much as always for being here, and do have yourself a wonderful day.